Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, as you guys can see from the title below, I'm going to be doing a part 2 of my interpretation of Sirach, the book of Sirach. I did a part 1, which I will link in the description box below. This was a couple months ago. Before I get into part 2 today, I'm going to do a quick recap over what some of the chapters talked about in part 1 really quickly, but I'm also gonna not go a whole lot into depth on those because I do have a whole video on that. And then after I do a quick recap of what I talked about last time in part 1, I'm gonna do part 2 today. So in part 1, I focused on chapters 1 through 16. Today, I'm gonna start with chapter 17 after I do my recap. Alright, so if you guys are interested in seeing that, just go ahead and follow along. Sorry, I'm kind of in a weird location today. I'm in a closet just because it was kind of the only private area to film today. So just bear with me. Okay, so a couple months ago in the book of Sirach, chapters 1 through 3 mostly focused on what wisdom truly meant. And it focused on how wisdom has to come from God and why we should fear God. So I get a lot more into depth about what wisdom truly means, but you guys will have to watch the other video to see that. Chapters 4 through 5 focuses on why we have to give to those in need, the poor, the needy, and why we should acknowledge our shame in a healthy way. So not in a way that will prevent us from coming back to God, but in a way that will prevent us from doing further wrongdoing. Chapters 6 through 9 mostly gave advice on how to build true friendships, how to know what a true friend is. It also explained the importance of listening to learn. And then also it was very big on being careful with one's words so as not to provoke those who have like a quick temper. And kind of part 2 today, we'll also talk about the importance of weighing our words before we speak. Chapters 10 through 12 focused on the difference between humility and arrogance. Why self-esteem is still important to have, even though we should still have humility. And also, those chapters were about why we shouldn't judge those solely based on appearance. Chapters 13 through 16 emphasized the concept of free will. And it really emphasized how humans, we are responsible for our own choices to sin, which is why we cannot blame God for the consequences of those sins that we chose to do. So yeah, so that's just a quick recap over what was discussed in part 1. Like I said, if you want to go more into depth, go ahead, check out that video in my description box below. So today, like I said, we're going to start with chapter 17. Basically, I'm just going to go bullet point by bullet point, main key things that it talked about in the chapter. I'm not going to analyze every single bullet point, but some of them I will. Okay, so these are mostly in my words. I will have a few exact verses I took from each chapter. But yeah, let's start with chapter 17. So the first thing was about how God shows us wisdom and knowledge, as well as he shows us good and evil. It was also about how God shows his glory to us. He obviously tells us to avoid all evil. Another thing is that our wickedness cannot be hidden from him. If you guys saw my last video, I really touched on no matter what we do, we can't hide from God, even if we wanted to. So chapter 17 was really about how everything we do, remember, God is always watching. Another thing, God says if we are good and virtuous now, he will rise up later and repay us. It also talks about how those who are very sorrowful and remorseful for their sins, he will encourage them to not lose hope and will help them climb out of their sin so that they can sin no more. And then it also talked about how God has great mercy and forgiveness for those who return to him. So I take this to mean that even if you are constantly struggling with the same sin again and again, as long as you keep coming back to God, he will accept you as his child and he will forgive you as long as you are actively trying to do better. As long as you are not trying to sin again, as long as you are taking steps in order to not sin again, he will keep forgiving you. So this is not to say that you should keep sinning and just expect God to forgive you. Like, no, we don't want to do that. But all I'm saying is that when we sin, we have a tendency to hide ourselves from God because we're ashamed of our sin. And God doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to realize that we can still go back to him. We can still return to him. and that we don't need to let our shame get in the way of coming back to him. So even though we've sinned, that doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to try to hide my face from God because I'm ashamed. No, it means that we need to repent, try to do better, and we can still turn back to God, and God is still merciful towards us. So that was chapter 17. Chapter 18 talked about how God is a just God. It talked about how nobody can lessen or increase the wonders of God. A Bible quote verse, Sirach 18 verses 10 says, "He sees and understands that their death, our death as people, is grievous, and so he forgives them all the more." So I really love this verse because this verse shows how patient God is with us and how understanding he is. So a lot of the time when I've read the Bible in the past, especially in the Old Testament, I get kind of scared because there are so many verses about how much anger God has towards sinners and people who've let him down, which makes sense because he's given us everything and we still choose to fail him every day. But a lot of those verses about his wrath and anger really scare me. But when I have these verses about how he understands us, he forgives us, it really comforts me, and it really shows how deep God's love for us goes and how understanding he is. So yes, God is the judge of us, but he is also our comforter. He is also our foundation. We are his children. He loves us and he cares for us. He doesn't want to see us suffer, and he forgives our iniquities. So the verse goes on to say in Sirach 18 verses 11 through 13, it says, "Man may be merciful to his fellow man, but the Lord's mercy reaches all flesh, reproving, admonishing, teaching as a shepherd guides his flock, merciful to those who accept his guidance, who are diligent in his precepts." Another thing that chapter talked about is that sometimes giving people advice and words means a lot more than physical gifts. Another verse that stood out to me, sorry these might seem a little bit random, I just took bullet point by bullet point of what I took from each chapter. Another verse is Sirach 18 verses 20. It says, "Before you have fallen, humble yourself. When you have sinned, show repentance." So I think this verse is reminding ourselves that no matter how many times we're forgiven by God, we are human, we are still bound to sin again. And we need to recognize that. I think that this verse means that before we even sin at all, we should humble ourselves before God and ask for forgiveness, even before we sin, and the strength, and we should ask him also for the strength to not sin again before we even sin at all. So we should be, obviously you shouldn't be expecting like, oh, I'm like the second you leave confession or something, you shouldn't be saying, oh, I'm good, I know I'm going to sin again, but that's okay, I can just go back. Like, no, but we have to be realistic. We have to remind ourselves that yes, we are going to stumble again, but before we do, we need to humble ourselves and ask God, Lord, please help me with this sin. Please help me to not do it again, if that makes sense. Another thing that chapter touches on is, before God, all things are fleeting. Sirach 18 verses 25 says, "Remember the time of hunger and the time of plenty, poverty, and want in the day of wealth." Another section in this chapter of Sirach was about self-control. I'm going to read this entire section on self-control because it is something that I struggle a lot with in my daily life, and I'm sure it is something that we all struggle with in one way or another. So, this is Sirach 18 verses 30 through 33. It says, "Go not after your lusts, but keep your desires in check. If you satisfy your lustful appetites, they will make you the sport of your enemies. Have no joy in the pleasures of a moment, which bring on poverty redoubled. Become not a glutton and wine bibber with nothing in your purse." So I love this section, and I think there's so many parts to unpack from it. So first, this section is not telling us that we have to completely eradicate our desires, but we have to become the masters of our desires. So we have to take control of our desires, even though they may never go away. We will submit to something in our life. It can either be God, or it can be a vice like lust, gambling, alcohol, gluttony, you name it. So we have to submit to something, might as well be God. So I like the verse about how also if we satisfy our appetites, they will make us the sport of our enemies. So this verse is describing how if the enemy, the devil, knows that we can be easily controlled or manipulated by something like lust or alcoholism or whatever the vice is, then the enemy can use those appetites to ruin us. So this is basically a precaution to not let our vices get the better of us and to not let the enemy win. All right, so we're going to move on to chapter 19. So chapter 19, first thing, it talks about how if we waste the little that we have, we will be stripped bare. Which I really need to work on, because a lot of the time I find myself wasting food, things like that. And I have to remind myself people are starving in the world. I need to get a lot better at that. So, and I think that's something we all can work on. Don't take for granted the things that you do have. Don't waste what we have. The next section is about gossip. So this is really big for me right now because it's something I've really struggled with in the last couple of weeks. So Sirach 19 verses 6 through 11 says, "Never repeat gossip, and you will not be reviled. Tell nothing to a friend or foe. If you have a fault, reveal it not. For he who hears it will hold it against you, and in time become your enemy. Let anything you hear die within you. Be assured it will not make you burst. When a fool hears something, he is in labor, like a woman giving birth to a child. Like an arrow lodged in a man's thigh is gossip in the breast of a fool." So like I said, I've really struggled with the sin of gossip lately. And I think it's one of the most common sins, and one of the most common sins we do without thinking about it. So gossip, it seems so natural to us because it seems natural to talk about other people. But when we only criticize and slander others, it takes us further away from God. So God tells us that if we hold things against others, then God in return will hold things against us. So gossip, like I said, is so dangerous because it feels natural to us. But we have to learn to break the cycle anyway, even though it might feel natural to do. So the moment we feel the need to say something bad about someone else, instead we should pray for them and try our best not to repeat the negative thoughts to others that we had about them in our heads. And we should try to not have negative thoughts about others in our heads in the first place. But, we especially should not repeat those to others, which again, I really struggle with too. I know it's so much easier said than done. And like I said, I really struggle with this, but just remember that we would want God to be merciful to us. So we should also have that same courtesy for others. And we should remember to have that same mercy for them as well. All right, moving on to chapter 20. So I'm going to start with a verse. Sirach 20 verses 1 through 2 says, "An admonition can be inopportune, and a man may be wise to hold his peace. It is much better to admonish than to lose one's temper, for one who admits his fault will be kept from disgrace." So I love this verse because first it brings up how timing is much more important than being right in the moment. So what that means is, this reminds us that just because we can criticize someone in the moment over some wrongdoing they've done to us, doesn't mean we should in that moment. And it doesn't mean that that criticism should be spoken right then. So knowing when to hold your tongue shows true strength over delivering a rebuke in anger. So silence, a lot of people think is weakness. It's not. Silence is not a weakness, but a sign of intelligence and patience. Okay? So also the verse about it being better to admonish than to lose one's temper also discusses how it's better to address a problem that you have with someone directly, but without anger, rather than silently stewing on it and, being like passive aggressive about it later or something like that. So if someone has genuinely wronged you, this verse is saying that it is necessary to address it directly with them, and that way your heart is not hardened towards them. So this helps you to confront them calmly rather than in anger. So this verse is basically saying, know when not to admonish someone, know when not to lash out in anger, which we should never be doing, but know when to talk to them about something that's bothering you, okay? Sometimes you should be more direct if you can say it calmly, but if you can't, if you're going to be angry and yell at them in the moment, then maybe you should wait until your anger has passed and then address it calmly with them later. Okay, these next few verses I love because I'm a very quiet person a lot of the time, and a lot of the time people who are much more extroverted than me, they tend to get a little annoyed with me about that. But I love these verses because it shows why silence can be a strength instead of a weakness. So Sirach 20 verses 4 through 7 says, "One man is silent and is thought wise, another is talkative and is disliked. One man is silent because he has nothing to say, another is silent biding his time. A wise man is silent till the right time comes, but a boasting fool ignores the proper time. He who talks too much is detested. He who pretends to authority is hated. So basically, this verse is talking about how silence can be a sign of profound wisdom. Wisdom is knowing when to talk and also when to just listen and sit back. By staying silent, you avoid things like spreading gossip, hurting someone else's feelings, or revealing your hand or your heart too early. Silence also allows you to wait for the right moment to talk and really analyze the weight of your words before you do talk. So, chapter 20 unpacks a lot more, but I mostly wanted to focus on the silence part. So let's move on to chapter 21. This will be the last chapter I talk about. So first thing chapter 21 talks about in Sirach is, for your past sins, you should pray to be forgiven. Violence and arrogance wipe out wealth. Sirach 21 verses 6 says, he who hates correction walks the sinner's path, but he who fears the Lord repents in his heart. So I really like this because we should not be afraid to humble ourselves before God and be open to criticism, especially if that criticism is only trying to help us and it will lead us to changing from our sinful ways and put us on the right path towards heaven. So again, like, sometimes criticism can be a good thing for us because sometimes we're not doing the right things, and sometimes we might need someone else to tell us, hey, I'm worried about you. I'm not sure you're doing the right things in these parts of your life. Not that they should be so judgmental, but if someone's just trying to help you in order for you to get to heaven, that's an act of love, okay? That's not them being judgmental always. Sometimes it's important that we tell those who are close to us that, hey, this isn't a good thing that you're doing, and I'm only saying this to help you because I love you and I want you to go to heaven. So also, chapter 21 talks about how a wise person knows and is aware of their own faults. Sirach 21 verses 15 says, when an intelligent man hears words of wisdom, he approves them and adds to them, hears them with scorn, and casts them behind his back. Sirach 21 verses 26 is another great verse that says, fools' thoughts are in their mouths, wise men's words are in their hearts. So I really love this verse. So let me say the verse again. Fools' thoughts are in their mouths, wise men's words are in their hearts. So I love this verse because it ties back to what we were talking about before with people who are more quiet or silent and how they typically have more wisdom, and those that just babble on don't necessarily possess the same wisdom. So it ties into that because when a fool has a thought in their head, they abruptly speak what is in their head immediately without weighing the consequences of their words or without filtering them. They speak entirely on impulse, and they're not really thinking about what they say. But when a wise person has a thought before they speak, they really do weigh the weight of their words, and they do actually possess an internal filter. So a wise person speaks only after they have thoroughly processed what to say and how to say it. They mastered their own words without being mastered by them. So I love how this verse is teaching us to think before we speak and to not just throw around words. I've seen so many people do that, and it only leads to gossip, regret, sadness, and anger. So before you speak to someone else, really weigh how what you will say will affect them. So remember, I know it's a cliche saying, but it's true. We really never know what's going on in someone's life. So please remember to always be kind and always use kind words. You never know how much your words could affect someone else in a positive or a negative way. So we want to be really careful with weighing our words before we speak. So I love how Sirach is talking about how we have to have the wisdom to know when to speak and what to say. And we have to trust the timing of that as well. So yeah, so that is everything that I'm going to talk about in Sirach today. I know I did not finish Sirach, but I will probably do a part 3 if you guys are interested in seeing that. So just let me know in the comments below. Sorry if I was looking over, I was just looking at my notes. So sorry if this sounded a little bit robotic. I was just trying to just make it flow more. So yeah, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much for being here. It would mean the world to me if you guys would like, comment, and subscribe. I really want to grow this YouTube family, and I really want to bring more people closer to God. That is my mission. That is the whole reason I'm here. So it would really mean a lot to me, you guys. Thank you guys again so much for being here. I will see you guys next time. Bye, guys.